Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Nostalgia Bubble podcast, the show where two lifelong best friends celebrate the movies that they love. I'm one of your hosts, Shuggie, an amateur film reviewer and nerd.
And I am Nye, Shuggie's carer.
I need a lot of care.
Yeah, just always keeping an eye on you, making sure you're okay.
You did when you came to visit me at university, you did put my laundry away for me, I remember.
Yeah. Had years of experience now. Just making sure that you're not living in your own feces.
It's going well.
So far, so good.
Yeah, exactly.
And this week was your pick, and it was Serenity, which is the kind of sequel film to the series Firefly. Yeah,
so my relationship with this film is slightly strange in that I saw it before I ever saw the show Firefly. And, to be fair, this would have been like around the age of 11, 12, whenever it came out on DVD, back in kind of like late 2005, maybe 2006, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like struck by it and some of the action sequences and some of the imagery, and it stayed in my head. And when I finally did come round to watch Firefly, I loved the show. I then revisited the film and go, oh, this was that one film that I saw as a kid, or, like a early teen. And yeah, it's been a favourite of mine, and as this kind of season for me has been focusing on some of my favourite characters, this contains Mal Reynolds, played by Nathan Fillion, one of my all-time favourite characters in film and TV. I know a friend of mine and myself once bought a TV show that says something along the lines of, if I die, tell Nathan Fillion I loved him, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was seeing this from the same perspective as you first saw it, so I haven't seen Firefly. And I did notice that there were probably elements of the story which I didn't quite get, or there were questions that I had were because I hadn't seen the series. But it was enjoyable, and I think it generally does do a good job of, explaining and having its own storyline that's kind of removed enough from the series for you to be able to enjoy it as a film in its own right.
Yeah, I mean, having seen the TV show and the film, I can say that there are kind of elements that build on stuff that was in the TV show, but this is very much its own fleshed out story. The operative is not a character that ever appears in the TV show.
Yeah.
It's not even like a rank of character that ever appears in the TV show. And yeah, I was really interested to see kind of how much of this kind of world made sense to you, how much of the kind of character dynamics you were able to get, having not seen the 14 episodes of TV that they had to build in.
Yeah, the character dynamics were the kind of the one thing that I did question a little. I felt that a lot of the peripheral characters didn't really have too much of an impact on the storyline, and there was just kind of a moment where I did question that, and then I sort of realised that actually they probably had some sort of relevance based on the series. So I think that for me was the main thing, was that, you did have characters like Inara or Kaylee, particularly for me, who didn't carry too much weight in this film, but I imagine they probably had some sort of relevance or kind of a much more prolific role to play in the series. So but yeah, I mean, there was just kind of, I just had a couple of questions about the characters, but I imagined, or I assume that that's because I hadn't seen the series.
Yeah, I think both of those get a lot more. There's a lot of time kind of devoted in the TV show to kind of Mal and Inara's relationship.
Yeah, and I think I could figure that one. Yeah. And Simon as well. I thought, I don't know how much involvement he had in this series.
Right from the start, he's one of the. Yeah, they're all kind of the 9 major crew. There from the start.
Yeah, because at the beginning he's a complete badass. Like, he walks in and he's like, and then you just don't really see much of him after that.
Oh, he's never a badass in the series.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. So that was just sort of a bit of a non sequitur then.
I mean, that's kind of his moment where he rescues River, like, that we never get to see. So the show starts with the crew of the Serenity, they're struggling for money, as they are at the start of this. That's always the case. And they pick up some passengers to kind of fund them a bit. And the passengers are Shepherd Book. It's Simon Tam, who's got River secretly stored in cryogenic freezing.
Yeah. And
then there's a Alliance operative who's there kind of tracking Simon.
Right. And
that gets resolved in the first episode. And then it's kind of the 9 characters, and each episode is kind of its own, either kind of Western themed or there are hints of Japanese samurai themed stuff as well. It kind of interplays between those two genres.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah, I mean, I can absolutely appreciate then that, having not seen the series, that there would have been some sort of character development there that I'd missed. So yeah, with regard to the kind of the genre itself, it was an interesting one, because when I kind of looked it up to read a little about it, it said sci-fi western, which I was initially pretty stumped by, and then there's that initial chase with the Reavers, and I went, okay, yeah, now I know why it's a western.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally being chased through the desert with outlaws and bandits.
Yeah, there's a whole episode of the TV show where they're literally transporting a herd of cows.
Right, okay. Yeah, I mean, I completely understood why it was called a western by about 15 minutes in. So, and I actually think they do a really good job of striking the balance. I did enjoy the film, actually. I wasn't entirely sure I would, but that initial chase between the Reavers and them did give me slight Star Wars vibes as well. I did understand. It kind of took me back a little bit to the pod race in Phantom Menace, just ever so slightly. And I mean, I completely understand why you chose this film.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, I'm gonna rattle through some pre-production. Obviously, it starts with the show Firefly. So it was originally kind of Joss Whedon developed the idea after reading a book about the Battle of Gettysburg, kind of from the American Civil War, and he wanted to make something which kind of followed the people who had fought on the losing side of a war, and he wanted kind of similar experiences as pioneers and immigrants on the outskirts of civilization in the old West. So not as kind of traditional kind of cowboys versus Indians Western films. It's more like the kind of pioneers traveling across America, setting up new cities, kind of Old West. When he cast the show, his main focus was looking for chemistry between the actors rather than big name actors, and the whole cast in the show is stunning. The core group is so good, and they're still always hugely popular whenever they pop up at conventions and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can imagine this has become a little bit of a cult classic.
Yeah, I'll get into that in a sec. Yeah. Just how much. So when the show initially aired on Fox back in 2002, they actually aired episodes out of order. They kind of mismarketed the show it was action sci-fi comedy, and it's there's a lot more kind of getting into the gritty character stuff in the show and in the film as well, than it is just jokes and action. And so I think that didn't resonate with people as well when they watched it. And as I say, they aired episodes not in the correct order for some reason, and then they cancelled it after 11 episodes of the show had been shown. So they didn't even finish the first season. And the last 3 were actually aired on the Sci-Fi channel over here in the UK the following year. After its release, so the fans kind of self-styled themselves as Browncoats, which is obviously the name for the people who fought for independence in the war. And they campaigned hard for the show to be saved, other networks to pick it up. They raised money for ads in Variety. They had a postcard writing campaign to the United Paramount Network, who do Paramount's TV stuff. But the kind of attempts to get it picked up by other networks failed, and eventually Whedon actually reached out to Barry Mendel at Universal Studios, who was a producer there, and he basically said, "Is there any way for me to continue this?" So he introduced Whedon to one of the executives called Mary Parent, who had seen the show, and she immediately signed up to do this without a script at all. And eventually script got done and a deal's agreed to make this film in 2004. So all 9 members of the cast agreed to return, but the 2 who couldn't commit to any sequels if it was successful enough were Ron Glass and Alan Tudyk, who play Shepherd Book and Hogan Washburn. So understandably, that's where their fates come in. Both end up getting killed off in the film.
Right, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. I think something that we should maybe talk about immediately, just so we kind of get it out the way, is the controversy around Joss Whedon.
Yeah, there's been accusations. They started with his time on Justice League of him basically abusing his power on set. And stuff has come out about older projects he's worked on, particularly from the cast of Buffy.
Yeah.
He's used his power to kind of basically throw his weight around, psychologically abuse some of the actors, threaten them with, if you don't do what I say, you're fired and you're finished in this business, stuff like that.
Yeah, and so it was interesting watching this film because I did a little bit of reading before watching the film, and just so that I could kind of go into it and see if I could spot any of the patterns, because a lot of the stuff that was spoken about, especially on Buffy, was about the writing around the female characters and how those stories were very much and the empowerment of the female characters was very much born from trauma. And of course, I went into this film and immediately the most powerful character in the film is basically buried in trauma. And of course, I don't know how, having not seen the series, I don't know sort of how directly linked it is to the series of Firefly, but it was really interesting to kind of see that direct reflection of what had already been mentioned, and also, even if it had come from the Firefly series, just to kind of recognize that maybe that's what he'd been setting up all along, and that it made me question actually if it is something that is not independent of Firefly, then has that writing been the case since the beginning of the series, and were the female characters in the movie always set to kind of face certain obstacles or come from certain places? And yeah, I thought that was kind of a very interesting way that sort of added another layer to my approach watching this film. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts on it are.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been Joss Whedon's writing of female characters and the way that they are three-dimensional, they're powerful characters but three-dimensional, has often been something that's been really praised. You look at someone like Buffy, you look at shows like Dollhouse, and yeah, he's had kind of a lot of praise for his writing of his characters. And for me, the thing that always kind of stands out in the kind of criticisms of Joss Whedon are kind of the toxic behaviour he exhibits on set. He kind of apparently revelled in making writers cry. He, if people didn't kind of want him to, if people weren't kind of doing exactly what he wanted, he would threaten their careers. Someone described him as being kind of casually cruel.
Yeah, and ultimately that's worse. The active treatment of members of your team and your crew, that's and the discrimination against women and that abuse of power is always going to be completely unjustifiable and awful. And I don't know, I haven't heard too much about how he acted on the set of Serenity. I just very quickly realized or saw that sort of reflection of what I'd heard about his writing in the show. There is also other ways to interpret it. Like it could be that women thrive and become powerful sort of in the face of adversity, and regardless of the hurdles they face, etc. So that particularly is possibly open to interpretation. But I think you're right to highlight the treatment of the actors and writers, etc. is, I mean, that's demonstrative, isn't it, of what he's like as a person rather than the writing.
Yeah, so to kind of talk about the couple of points you raised there, I think in terms of the characters, I definitely get the like strength through trauma. I think just Joss Whedon has a habit of that with his characters in general. Killing someone off to fuel another person's character, just casually discarding them. And there was definitely kind of accusations from Gal Gadot playing Wonder Woman that basically because Joss Whedon didn't like her, he just changed her character just to basically almost as a middle finger up to her.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, that's just a total abuse of power, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I know specifically on Firefly, that's where kind of the stuff from the writers came. There wasn't much from kind of the cast of Firefly, but stuff from kind of backroom people.
Yeah, I know that there was kind of active manipulation of characters and their storylines in order to spite the actors themselves. I think that there was some of that issue in Buffy as well. I'm not
specifically targeting Charisma Carpenter's character Cordelia.
Yeah, and was she was pregnant at one point, wasn't she?
Yeah.
And I think that she said she kind of highlighted that she was bullied during her pregnancy.
Yeah.
And I know that it may not have initially been Joss's intention to write characters that had kind of come from trauma and rooted his female characters in trauma, but I think maybe that sort of active manipulation of their stories just to spite the actors is it just kind of ties in with the demonstrative maltreatment of his writers.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we don't condone his behaviour on any of his sets. I always find kind of that discussion of separating art from the artist quite a hard one, particularly where it's something that you already love and that there are so many other people involved with it that have put so much hard work into it. I think it'd be unfair to them to completely write it off. It's always a hard one for me. Again, picking this film with all the Joss Whedon stuff it's something I did wrestle with, but again I decided it's a film I loved and we could address it, so let's talk about the film anyway, and we can talk about this. So,
of course. I think it's kind of, as long as you don't sort of ignore the fact that these things have happened and brush it under the carpet, and you're transparent and acknowledge that it's happened, and obviously actively voice your opinion against it, I think that that's okay. But you're completely right that there are these actors that have felt abused, and there are these writers that have felt completely mistreated, and it wouldn't be fair to them, who have also put work into this project, to kind of dismiss the whole thing because of the way that they were treated by it. It still has come out as a good film, and that's not necessarily thanks to Joss Whedon. That's thanks to the writers. That's thanks to the actors,
production designers,
that's thanks
editors,
to production. Exactly, yeah, and
everyone behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I think when you start giving credit to one person, or when you start ignoring a film or a project or a piece of work because of one person's actions, then you start you kind of unintentionally give them credit for the work, because there are hundreds of people involved in this project, and I don't think that you can dismiss an entire piece because of the actions of one person when so many other people put such hard work into it.
Yeah, well said. Okay, with all that done, let's get into the film.
Yes.
So how did you kind of deal? There's a lot of kind of information thrown at you at the start with kind of the alliance and the war, and right off the bat kind of you get the feeling this is like propaganda, like British Empire-esque propaganda. You know, there's the whole line of, we aren't telling people what to think, we're trying to show them how. And you just go, oh, this is like fascism 101, controlling the minds of the populace.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of exposition, it couldn't be clearer. I think, you know, like they're not trying to beat around the bush, and it's not in any way confusing. I think you'd kind of given me some backstory already, some background. I kind of already understood the relationship between the Alliance and the Independents. So for me, it was pretty clear what was going on. But yeah, as I said, you know, they make it as clear as could be.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of very imperialistic rhetoric that they use.
Yeah, it's incredibly on the nose.
Yeah, when they're talking about, you know, we're making their societies better, stuff like that. It's, you know, it sounds like the British Empire talking about going into Africa and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it is colonisation, or
it's colonisation.
It's an attempt at colonisation, and it's what happens when people push back and ultimately enters into a civil war.
Yeah. And then we kind of get introduced to the face of the villain, in kind of the face. I don't think you can call just Chiwetel Ejiofor's the operative, like a nameless, faceless guy, as he's not necessarily the villain. It's the government that he's there representing that is the villain. But he's
the pawn.
He's the pawn. He's their representative in this film. And I think this must have been the first time I saw Chiwetel Ejiofor. And, you know, obviously go on to, you know, 12 Years a Slave and incredible acting performances that made him known around the world later on. But yeah, I've been a fan of him since I saw this film.
So the one thing about the operative's character is, I think the way that he was written made the storyline become a little bit predictable. You know, we knew that there was a secret that they were trying to hide. We knew that the operative was trying to do the bidding of the Alliance. And as soon as he kind of said, well, I don't care what I believe, I just have to believe. You know, I believe, I don't care what, I just believe. You knew that he was going to find out the truth and he was going to turn. And you could always kind of see that coming, I felt. What I did think was a really nice mirroring of his character was Shepherd Book.
Okay.
And the way that, you know, he says to Mal, just as he dies, I don't care what you believe, you just have to believe.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of like that sets up a real pull for Mal, because I think that's the moment where he aligns himself with the operative and he goes, oh my God, I'm actually no better than this guy. Like,
it's interesting. It's an interesting read.
In the sense that, like, he's so blinded by his belief that he's then able to kind of understand who the operative is a bit more. That was the way that I saw it, and you know, but it did, as I said, I felt like the way the operative was written did kind of bring a little bit of predictability to the story, and like especially his storyline through the film.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting read that I don't necessarily agree with in terms of Mal's journey. I like what you say about kind of the comparison between Shepherd and the operative. But for me, the operative is kind of, he's this character that's fueled by his just undying belief to the cause, essentially. And when
but not knowing what the cause is.
Well, no, he knows what the cause is. He doesn't know about kind of how it's being achieved.
Right.
And his mind is that, in his mind, he's the one who has to do the horrible things to make it happen, which is this kind of perfect world without sin. And he won't be able to live there. But if the people who are the ones who are going to run this world are the ones basically doing horrible things, then that world can't be achieved by them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where his thing is. But so he has this belief. Whereas and again, I have the extra context of having seen the show. Of
course, yeah.
There's like this hint at the start of the show. I just rewatched like the first half of the first episode, that back when the war's being fought, Mal was a religious character.
Right.
And after they lost that war, he threw aside religion. Like he abandoned religion. And Shepard's always been kind of... the Shepherd has always been the character on the show who would call him out for when he was making immoral choices and try and push him to be a better person. You know, he kind of always has this belief in Mal that he is a good human being fundamentally.
Yeah.
But that Mal doesn't have this sense of belief. And I think belief is obviously a huge important kind of theme in this show. And, you know, obviously there's the whole line of, you know, where he says, why do you always assume when I talk about belief I'm talking about religion? That you don't need to believe in religion, and that Mal could never actually beat the operative unless he found something to believe in. So, and I think this kind of goes to the heart of Mal's whole character arc in this show, in this film, which is, you know, at the start of the film, he is interested in one thing and one thing only, and that is survival for him and his crew. He's not interested in making moral decisions, he's only interested in making the decisions that will benefit them. And you kind of see that. You mentioned the like bank heist and Reaver chase when the Reavers do attack and the guy kind of grabs onto their shuttle and he throws the guy off rather than ditching the loot.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I see that completely.
And yeah, and his arc is coming to believe in something, which is that the people have a right to know the truth. And it's almost like him refinding his belief from before we've seen him, from before the show, before the film. He's refinding his belief that made him fight in that war. Right,
okay. I see now. That makes a lot more sense, I think, having that context. And I guess that, again, that goes back to, you know, having not seen the show, you miss certain character points that would inform your understanding of the film.
I mean, but for me, that is there in this film. Like the opening on the Serenity, where we kind of get quick, short introduced to a lot of the characters, and we kind of get very broad overviews of who they are. You know, like Wash is the pilot, Jane's the like heavy weaponry guy, Kaylee's the engineer. We kind of get this, that's where we get this sense, you know, Mal, he's all about survival for what benefits him and his crew.
And
I think they pretty much openly say that at points as well. Like they ensure that, I think, to try and ensure that people who haven't seen the show can still understand that and understand where they're coming from, so we can see through to the end kind of the change that goes over him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you definitely see that change and you see that arc. And I wasn't so much questioning that. I was more just kind of drawing a bit of a parallel between, maybe a better parallel to would be the Shepherd and the operative. Belief is a very interesting one, because ultimately the belief, political belief and religious belief, is asking you to do the same thing, which is ignore logic and reason. In my personal opinion, you know, like I feel that political belief is there is no belief, there is facts and figures, and that's what you look at. It's not about having to believe. And I think we've seen so much of that in the last few years, especially in the UK, about how we're being asked to just believe, and if something's not happening, then we're not believing hard enough, you know. There seems to be a real prominent agenda that is being pushed, and it's very much built on that sort of privileged schoolboy sense of belief, which and that asks you to ignore facts, figures and reason. And I would also argue that religious belief is sort of asking you to wholeheartedly believe in something that is not actually proven in a that's scientific way. And so, but that's why I feel that there's a really interesting parallel there, because they're both asking Mal to blindly believe in something.
I don't know if the Shepherd's asking him to blindly believe in something. He's saying he needs to believe in something, though. You know, there's this there's a song lyric which is, "If you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything." And I think that's kind of where Shepherd Book is pushing Mal from. It's not just blindly follow something. It's you need to find something that you truly believe in.
Yeah.
Whether that is doing the right thing, or, obviously for the operative, it's this kind of mesh of political and religious belief that the whole kind of alliance parliament is built upon. Where Mal needs to find what it is he believes in, and by the time they go to Miranda and discover the truth of what's going to happen there, he has found that, and that is that he once again needs to fight against this corrupt government.
No, I mean, I don't disagree with that at all. I just think that I thought there was almost kind of like the angel and the devil on Mal's shoulder, and that sort of pull between both the operative and the shepherd.
Fair enough. I do want to quickly mention in the bank heist. So there's a couple of they're not cameos. It's because you mentioned when we talked about Mystery Men, you enjoyed kind of seeing actors in their early days.
Yes.
So we have a couple of examples of that. So in the bank heist, they bring River along to kind of like sense what people are thinking. She's kind of, she's got this kind of like underlying psychic abilities. And she senses that, someone's going to try and pull a gun and stop them from robbing the bank.
Yeah.
And that guy who's going to pull a gun is, I don't know if you watched the show, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
I've watched a couple of episodes, yeah.
It's Glenn Howerton who plays Dennis.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Great. And was that just kind of like was he already sort of involved in...
This is pre It's Always Sunny, which is, obviously kind of where he gained a level of fame from.
Okay, so this was just kind of like a bit part that...
Yeah, this was just an early film role. And there's an even bigger one later on in the film that I'll get to when we get there. And as you say, this for me is kind of like the one Western sequence. They're robbing a bank and then they're running away from this eviler gang, essentially. It's also, there's so many great little jokes in this one. Jane trying to bring the grenades the whole time.
Yeah.
The point where the guys, where they find the secret vault and the guy's like, I need your authorization code, and Jane just fires his gun. And when Mal's negotiating with this guard down there about the severity of the injury to give him, so it appears he didn't give up. It's great.
Yeah, I did like that scene. That made me chuckle a couple of times, actually, which was a really nice sort of interjection of humour, which you weren't quite expecting. I think there was, there was no real show of humour up until that moment.
We get a little bit when we're first introduced to the Serenity, and it's this big like epic opening, and then it starts crashing. Yeah. And then there's the
and they're just so calmly walking around.
There's a classic line that is very often quoted now, and like I've seen merch with this, which is it's going to be an interesting landing. Define interesting. Oh god, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
And for me, like this film leans more on sci-fi than Western, compared to the show. Like the show, I think there are far more times where it goes harder into being Western. Right. Whereas this is kind of the one sequence in the show where it's like it's still showing its Western roots and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely felt that it felt more like a sci-fi film, but that first 20 minutes or so, I absolutely understood why it was classed as a sci-fi Western, for sure. Yeah. And
as I say, the show goes even harder into that.
Right. I feel like you're really trying to edge me towards watching Firefly now.
Watch the damn show, Nye!
Yeah, okay, no, I will. Because I did enjoy the film, so yeah, I absolutely will.
I'm glad. If I got one thing out of this podcast, it's getting you to watch Firefly.
Yeah.
Anyway, they escape, and we kind of get to see a lot of the, like, these guys in action. We see, like, Mal kind of deadly with the shot when he has to be under pressure after missing a couple. We see, like, Wash's flying skills and Zoe's, calmness under pressure, stuff like this. For me, Zoe's an interesting one. Like, what was your read on her character actually in this film?
I don't want to say obsolete, but I don't think we got what we could have got out of her. I think I saw the character as there is so much more that we can get from you, and we're not seeing it. And I think again that for me was something that I expected would be more clear in the series than in the film. You see it once Bosch has died. You kind of see that willingness to, I mean, I guess there was always that readiness to put herself on the front line, but there was that sort of lack of reserve once Wash died. She just kind of stepped out and she was just ready to throw everything away, which is something that I guess you could see in two ways. Like, there's obviously the fearlessness and that sort of that kind of head down, just go for it, not really thinking about the consequences anymore. But also, I mean, this is something that Mal has tried to protect them from for so long, and then she steps up as well. She goes, you go, you do what you need to do, and we'll stay here and hold them off. And I think this is kind of, in this film, you see that moment where she takes the reins. There is an element of Mal kind of being very tunnel visioned, and not saying that he's putting his crew at the forefront of his mission, but actually he ends up just putting them in danger time and time again. And there's this moment where she kind of goes, right, I'm going to take over. You do what you need to do. I'm going to run this ship. And the only thing is that, obviously, again, maybe this is just slightly coloured by what I'd read beforehand, but it felt like that only came out of her once Wash had died. And she felt like she had nothing to live for, potentially.
Okay. Yeah.
So I would have quite liked to have seen that side of her more through the film, maybe given something for Mal to wrestle against a little more.
Yeah, so for me, she's the character that has like the least kind of, if you haven't seen the show, I think she's the hardest to kind of understand who she is and like what her kind of role in the ship is and what her character is. So she's the character who's been with Mal ever since the war. Like, she was in Mal's platoon in the war, essentially.
Yeah.
So she's been, Mal's essentially right hand ever since then. I think in the show, like, she's always kind of the very level-headed one. Like, Mal's obviously very tempestuous, prone to, mood swings and, just punching people out of nowhere. Whereas she's kind of the one who always reins him in when someone has to. And is almost like the sensible voice in his ear. Like, not necessarily always the moral one, because we get kind of that scene where, they're talking about post the heist, and she says, we could have cut the cargo, and Mal says, we couldn't do that, I need to, feed my crew and stuff. And she, she does say, I don't disagree. But, she's always like, she's not necessarily saying, you should have done this, which was always kind of Shepard Book's role of being like, here's the moral thing you should have done. But she's kind of almost the voice of reason on the ship of these just full of eccentric, crazy people.
Yeah, she's there to make him think a little.
Yeah. And I think you don't kind of get the strength of that relationship in this. There are a couple of moments where kind of that comes through. You've got the moment where Jane kind of, once they find out that River Tam has this, like, embedded, like, trigger in her that causes her to kind of lose it and attack people.
Yeah.
And Jane, at which point, Mal has that, do you want to lead this ship? And Jane's like, yes, and starts having a go at him. And he brings up the war, and Mal kind of just goes quiet. It's Zoe who, is on such, like, a kind of wavelength with Mal. She's just like, you need to leave this room, because she knows exactly, like, if he keeps going, what's going to happen. Like, she's the one who essentially keeps the order, for me. And I think you're right. Like when Wash dies, she still has that kind of level-headed, I can take over at a moment's need if I have to. I'm also a leader. But then once the Reavers kind of break through, we do see her kind of lose that for the first time ever. Like, I think it's the first time that really anything gets to her. Obviously, when, her husband's dead, that's very understandable.
But then you do sort of towards the end, when Mal kind of says, oh, it's going to be a bumpy ride, and she says it always is. I was very much like, you don't seem like you're in mourning anymore. You just seem back to your old self. Like, her husband died. It wasn't a bumpy ride. Like, her husband died. He got impaled. Like,
for me, she's a soldier. Like, and her mentality is, I can process this, but I'm not going to show it to people. Is probably where her head is. So she's probably, she probably is mourning, but she's like, I have a job to do, and I'm going to keep doing it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I do see that. I actually kind of also questioned Inara's role in this slightly. I understand that, it's nice to have a nod to the series. I know that she was used as sort of bait for Mal, which I quite liked that, when they got off the call and then, and it was kind of, he was sort of dithering and a bit kind of not making sense and clearly tripping over his words and stuff, and then he switches off the call and everyone gets into the same room and they're like, trap, it's a trap, and there's just so like deadpan, they know exactly what's going on, and you kind of don't expect that switch, and I actually really liked that, and I thought that was really well written, and I thought that Mal was brilliant in that kind of switch from one to the other and that certainty, and but ultimately, I mean, she ended up painting the ship. Like, it felt a little bit like her character was redundant.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they didn't know how to really include her in this film as much.
Yeah, maybe it was just kind of a bit of a reminisce back to the series. I mean, again, I haven't seen it, so I can't tell you, but...
I mean, like, she gets kind of the one role, like, couple of scenes where she's important in the middle, like where she plays a pivotal role in influencing the plot. But I think also she's there because she is Mal's love interest in the franchise, like, and they are trying to, develop that. There was obviously the fact that, they wrote out the two guys who, couldn't commit to sequels. There was clearly plans for sequels when they wrote the film, and they were kind of... So I think her journey in this is... So she lived on the ship and she went off to do her escorting when they were, in port places, essentially. But she had kind of this tempestuous relationship with Mal. There's the great line where Kaylee's like, how are you sure it's a trap? And he says, did you see us fight?
Yeah.
Trap. Because they do, like, and as soon as they meet up on, in her training school, the first thing they do is they start fighting about whether he should have come or not.
Yeah.
But I think it also kind of develops this, idea that she has taken some time apart from the ship, and she does miss it. At the end where he asks her, "Are you ready to go back to the training school and your students?" and she says, "I don't know," and it's not a, I like the fact that it's not just a, no, I'm going to stay. It's kind of a, I don't know. They left it open to, like, kind of further story arcs, obviously.
Yeah.
And further development of that relationship.
Yeah, okay. Now when you kind of put it into that perspective, you understand why she's been reintroduced. I'm not sure, how much impact the character actually had on the film itself that another character couldn't have done, But
in this one film, it's not.
Yeah, I understand the purpose of reintroducing her, so...
Yeah.
But again, like, I don't have that background from the series,
Yeah, so we kind of, I guess we have to talk about they go to try and rescue Inara. The operative has well, actually, we need to kind of step back because the operative discovers them because they place this subliminal message into an advert that's been, pumped around all around the galaxy for a few weeks, that triggers this kind of response in River Tam. So River Tam's kind of, for context, like her role in the show was essentially her at the start of this, where, she's a bit weird and, kind of almost ethereal, and she says these things that don't make much sense, but she has these clearly powerful underlying psychic powers that she doesn't quite have a grasp on. And we get that if you go back to her as a child, she was like, so there's this whole kind of speech where Simon introduces her saying, he starts off saying, I'm a genius, I'm brilliant, I qualified as a doctor and all of this. And when I tell you that my sister makes me look like an idiot, like, you got to kind of grasp how intelligent she is.
Yeah.
Clearly the Alliance have like really messed with her head, and this is kind of an exploration of how that happened. She overheard secrets that she wasn't meant to, and that secret is Miranda. And yeah, so it's kind of an exploration of how did River Tam end up like this, which I think was the biggest kind of remaining question from the show, is
right.
Like, what's River Tam's deal? And so that's why they chose to explore that, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
So they trigger her, she beats up a bunch of people in a bar, Simon like gives a code word to knock her out, and that allows the operative to find them, and that's how he ends up kind of getting Inara, and they go there, and this is kind of the first confrontation between Mal and the operative. And again, I love this scene. It's Mal comes out, he's like, they're almost negotiating a deal, and Mal's, his whole bit of like, no, you're coming at this all wrong, you got to offer me payment. Yeah. But the operative, like, when he's just so shrewd and he's like, that's a trap, if I offer you payment, you play the like better man. And it's like, yeah. It's a perfect kind of scene of these two people who are clearly so experienced and kind of really grasp how each other operates. Particularly the operative grasps how Mal thinks.
Yeah.
It's quite an intimidating scene. And then he proceeds to just beat him to hell.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of does just sort of knowingly subvert those sort of negotiation scenes that you see classically through films. Yeah.
I love this scene. Like, it's just, it really sets up what an intimidating villain he is. But it's also just, there's always some great dialogue.
Kind of going back to Inglourious Bastards as well, and those villains with power, or those people with power, are the ones that don't need to wield it. And if you look at, say, that opening scene with Christoph Waltz, that sort of calmness and that stillness that he has, and the friendliness that he approaches the situation with, you sort of see a similar tact here. And it just, if nothing else, it just kind of emphasizes and highlights the power these people have, and the level of danger that they pose.
But I also do like that you kind of get just how sneaky and underhanded Mal is. Like, he's pulled the pulse beacon off the ship that they're targeting a missile at. Yeah. And when they escape, they're like, can we track this, whatever, a NavSat I think it's called. And they've sent off like 7 bins, each with a little beacon in it.
Yeah. He does remind me a little bit of, he's a more serious and possibly more competent in some ways version of Han Solo.
That's the name I was expecting. Yeah. Like, he definitely, there must have been inspiration there. Like,
absolutely,
the kind of scoundrel and rogue. But I think he's a more, because they have 14 episodes of TV show and this film to dive into him, I think he is a more developed character than Han Solo ever is. Which, I love Han Solo. We're gonna get people in the comments going, how dare you insult Han Solo? Yeah. Obviously he's one of my all-time favourite characters as well, but definitely inspiration there.
But he did seem a little more straight shooting, and a little more together.
Yeah.
A little more traumatized, maybe, actually, is the word.
Yeah. I mean, he's gone through war, and a war that he's lost, which, that's got to traumatize you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but there was a very kind of a very obvious sort of parallel there for me.
Yeah. I mean, I 100%. Like, I don't think anyone could miss that.
Yeah.
So they find out what Miranda is, and they go to escape there, but not before the operative destroys Shepherd Book's kind of home area, and Shepherd Book dies, which is like the first major character from the franchise's death. He was like a core member of the crew in the show.
Right.
And obviously he kind of clearly moved on from that in the film. He's joined this whole other mining colony. There's a great little line where the first time they meet, where Mal says to him, "One day you have to explain to me how you know all this stuff about the Alliance," and he just says, "No, I don't," which is obviously as much to like the audience and fans as it is to Mal's character.
Yeah. I quite like that though, because I mean, a lot of the time series and TV and films try so hard to explain stuff that sometimes it's too much, and just to kind of be like, no, you just got to accept it for what it is. It's less work for them. In a way it's less work for us, because we're not trying to kind of thread too many storylines together and add too many numbers up in our head, so and yeah, I just quite like the idea that they just kind of bluntly state that we just have to take something at face value and that's it.
And they do eventually explain it in like a supplementary comic book. The story is out there if you want to learn about Shepherd Book more.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so obviously that's pretty devastating. And then this is kind of the moment where we see Mal, he goes from being kind of almost the goofy leader with a little bit of, quippy dialogue and occasional snaps to... this is where he finds the thing to believe in, which is, they've killed this great friend of mine. There's something out there that we need to find out what it is. And he goes into full leadership mode. They make the Serenity look like a Reaver ship, so they can pass through Reaver space. Which, they're doing pretty horrible stuff, like tying the corpses of their friends to the front of the ship and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a nice thing they're doing here. And, this ship is their home. And as we kind of learn in the last lines, they love it. And that's why the Serenity, despite falling apart the whole time, just keeps going, because they treat it with such love.
Yeah.
And they're doing this because they suddenly have a mission. And this is like Nathan Fillion tour de force in this moment, where he's like suddenly hard switch from the kind of Han Solo figure to serious, this is what we're doing, I'm in charge.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the first time, he always had that concern for his crew, and obviously he now has an active cause. It's not just about survival.
Yeah.
But this is the first time that you really see command from him. And, what we say that we see from Zoe once Wash has died is exactly what you see from Mal here. And maybe it is that kind of trauma of losing somebody that is really close to you and that you value, and that sort of fire that you get lit under you from those events. But you see him step up, and he evolves here, and similarly that's kind of what you see with Zoe at the end as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And they make it through to Miranda, and we kind of learn the truth that there was this chemical put into the air there that caused it was to make people calmer and reduce fighting, and it just made people just stop. They just stopped doing anything.
Yeah.
And then the real kicker is that 1/10% of the population, essentially, they became the Reavers. And here's where I have the second little actor appearance tidbit.
Okay.
The person in the in the video that is kind of talking to it. Yeah. It's Sarah Paulson.
It is indeed, yeah. Who is now, I think, on Amazon, is the highest billed actor in the film. So it's one of the it's the first listed actor in the film.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, which I found quite cool.
This is a very early film role for her.
Right.
She's not been in many films before this.
She was good.
It's an impactful little role.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also impactful because of the context as well. But yeah, I really liked this whole scene where they're on Miranda. I thought it was really well done because there was something really harrowing about, how there was no obvious cause of this thing. It was just this really. It was very odd and very kind of discomforting, and it felt disjointed. And the only thing I'd say, and this was the second point, or just before this was the second point where the film got a little bit predictable. When they posed as the Reavers, and you knew that Reavers had some relevance to Miranda, and you knew that there was something they were hiding on Miranda. That's when I was like, they created the Reavers.
I don't think it's a great, it's not
a huge reveal. It's not it's not one of film's greatest twists. I think what's more shocking about this is that you don't realize the extent to which this whole thing goes. I think they said something along the lines of 30 million people.
Yeah, it's an entire planet's worth of people. And the fact that most of them don't get turned to Reavers, they just stop doing anything and die because of the experimentation that's gone on here. This attempt to create this kind of perfect world without sin. It's a horrific thing, and the more you think about it, and I really like kind of the slowness of that kind of reveal of what happens to people, where you say you get this kind of reveal that then nothing has happened to these people, where at first it's skeletons and they're saying, oh, there's no gunshots or trauma, and so they immediately go to poison, and then they find the people who are kind of preserved, and they're like, well, there's no discoloration or anything here. They're not bent over like they were in agony or stuff like that, and it's kind of that slow realization that just nothing happened to these people except that they just stopped.
And there is something sort of really interesting about this in sort of a real world context as well. There is something to be said for the kind of stagnation of people's daily life and people's activity. I mean, everything becomes more and more immediate, and you've got entertainment, you've got food, you've got shopping, everything, you've got socializing, gaming, everything is on your TV now, or you could do it all from your sofa. And I think it's not if you look at WALL-E, even that whole thing about people kind of moving onto the spaceships, and they aren't really encouraged to do anything particularly strenuous, and that sort of slowing to a stop with the more knowledge that is gained and gathered, actually the less, or the slower we move. I think
fascinating point
is just an interesting take on it. That for me was something that I found a little bit more applicable than Reavers.
And probably than it was at the time. It's probably more relevant to today's society than it was back in 2005. So I like that point a lot. It's great. And then we get one of the coolest moments of the film where they kind of realise there are two armies between them and where they have to go. So they go back through the Reavers, but just before they're out, they attack one, so they all start chasing them. And you get this great moment where you're kind of following Stuart Ledgerford's character on the brig of his ship as the Serenity comes out of this kind of cloud. And he's just his confidence and his you're not even changing direction. It's just like a uber I've won moment. And then suddenly the Reaver army pops out, and suddenly the fear in his face and his voice as he's just like, fire at the Reavers, fire at anything.
Just shoot, start shooting.
It's a great moment. And then we get a full space battle, which the budget of this film is not huge, so it's pretty impressive. We get Wash pulling out all these fancy flying maneuvers, and what has become one of the most heartbreaking lines in cinema history for Firefly fans. I'm a leaf on the wind, watch how I soar.
Yeah, oh, chills. Doesn't even finish it.
Well, he does the first time as he's flying through them. Yeah, and it starts off as, a joke. He's saying this, and people are like, "You're a what?" And it's just a funny line. Wash is obviously one of the funniest characters in the show.
Yeah.
And then they crash, and he says it a second time, but as you say, he can't finish it because a Reaver suddenly shoots him through the window.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. And then we get to this kind of final moment where Mal heads to this kind of backup generator that he can send out the video from, and everyone else is making this final stand. So this is the moment kind of that I remember from watching this film as like a 12-year-old, was when all the hope seems lost for everyone else when they're making this final stand, and they've fallen back behind the blast doors and they won't shut, and Simon gets shot and his medical bag is on the other side, and they need to do something to get there to save their lives. And I will say this is kind of one of the reasons I think that Wash was killed, is that you got the sense of any of these characters could die at this point.
Yeah, and even so far as to say that River could die. There is that moment where she manages to throw the bag through the door and gets dragged off, and obviously up until this point you've seen elements of her kind of combat skills and her athleticism, but you don't see it until this point.
Yeah. So this is the thing that stuck with me, is the two moments is one, her going, my turn, when she talked about, Simon's been looking after her for so long.
Yeah.
Now it's her turn to look after him, and then runs through that door and dives through the half closed blast door.
Yeah.
And the second, so obviously then she starts going at them with an axe and a sword.
Yeah.
And the second is when that door opens and she stood there in shadow. It's just an image that is burned into my brain. And when I watched the film again, I was like, that's what that's from. Oh, this was awesome.
Oh, so you couldn't place it until you rewatched
until I watched the show and then the film.
That is the essence of nostalgia right there.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I have to include this film. Yeah,
the only thing that I did take away from that, well, not the only thing, but one thing I did take away from that is how much the film cover is a bit of a catfish, because you're kind of expecting this performance from her the whole way through the film. But I think it works really well. There's no part of her story that dismantles her character in any sort of way or undermines her character. I don't think that you see her as being any less strong. I think you see her as kind of, she is recovering and she is surviving up until this point. Similarly to somebody like Mal, she might be the strongest person there, but it's still about survival for her up until this point, and then she's in a position where she can look after Simon, and she
begins to kind of recover from what the Alliance did to her now that she has the Miranda secret out of her head.
Yeah, this is the first
it's not
time,
just in here.
Yeah, this is the first time that you see her use these skills out of choice as well, and so already she has got agency and she has taken power, and that's when she thrives. And you're right, that moment where the doors open up again is just great shot. Fantastic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For me, the two characters that are at the heart of this film that this film focuses on are Mal and River. Those are the two with strong arcs that they chose to focus on, and I think it works.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of my point with, even having not seen the series, the peripheral characters aren't necessarily as impactful as they potentially would have been had they chosen to focus elsewhere. But I think because they have decided to focus on the character arcs of River and Mal, naturally that's why you see those peripheral characters kind of sit back a little more.
And obviously in the TV show, like every character kind of gets their episode or two where their story gets focused in on, and they're not.
Yeah.
So Mal's always kind of a central character in the show, but everyone else kind of gets their moments to be central as well.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, it makes sense that Mal, he is the main character effectively. He is the main protagonist, and River Tam was the character with this kind of biggest outstanding question mark. So it also makes sense that she's the other main character the other character they pick to focus on.
Yeah.
And I do like, so we have kind of the final confrontation between Mal and the operative as well. And I like that kind of Mal does get to him. Like the first time they meet, obviously he says, "You can't make me angry," but Mal gets to him at this point.
Yeah.
There's a great badass one-liner where he's obviously asked people about like, "Do you know what your sin is?" And he just goes, "Hell, I'm a fan of all 7."
Yeah. And then I think he says, "But you're about to see wrath or something," and then misses. And
right?
Like,
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh no," but I think I think this is kind of where you see a little bit more character come through here. This is he sort of undermines that seriousness by kind of coming out with a badass one-liner and then not following through, and even when the operative like presumably paralyzes him and you see him kind of flinch, and then out of nowhere like knocks him out, and like the way that he just so casually goes, "Oh, I've got a cluster of nerves that were damaged in the war," and like it's all of that. I feel like even throughout this conflict there's still that undertone of humor and that kind of casual disregard for the seriousness of the situation on Mal's part.
I mean, yeah, and that's Mal through to a T.
Yeah, and like there's and that's where you see full on Han Solo, and I think there's a really nice balance that's struck through Mal's arc where you get those moments where he is dead serious, and he after the Shepherd book dies, you see everything that Mal needs to be at that time, and ultimately you get to the end of the film and you kind of go, actually Mal did everything he needed to do through the whole film. He wasn't less, he wasn't more. Even when other characters question him, so like when Zoe kind of speaks to him about kind of the person that he threw off the cargo, getting away from the bank heist, that sort of idea that he could have been more, he could have done more, and he sort of makes it clear that actually he wasn't less, he wasn't more, he didn't need to be. What he did was the right thing to do, and actually you see him sort of adapt to those levels through the film, which you kind of get really nicely summed up in this scene.
And I also love the fact that in this kind of big pivotal fight, you still get those kind of, he's the scoundrel, he's the rogue, he fights dirty. He like hides, a weapon to hit him with.
Yeah.
He obviously, he fakes that he's got paralyzed with the nerve cluster, so he can catch him completely unawares.
Yeah.
He's not the honourable guy who will fight with honour. He's gonna do whatever it takes to win. And it's a great kind of callback to. There is an episode where he ends up defending Inara's honour at one point in this like almost like swashbuckling city, and he has to do a fencing match with someone, and he ends up winning. And he's like, and obviously the guy's like, you've won, kill me. And he's like, no, I guess I am the better person. And he just leaves him a little stab in the shoulder or a cut on the cheek or something. Goes, well, a little bit.
Yeah. So which again, like, just goes back to undermining the seriousness of it with that kind of humour that he
kind
brings.
That's why he's so beloved.
Yeah. Great character, fantastically portrayed as well. I
think Nathan
I immediately
Fillion
liked him. I from within literally the first 30 seconds, I thought, okay, I'm going to like this character.
Yeah, I think Nathan Fillion is one of the most kind of charismatic actors working on. He mainly works on telly. I'd like to see him more in film. I know he's going to be in the next Suicide Squad, which is unsurprising because James Gunn is directing that, and he's in most of James Gunn's stuff. definitely, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, very much liked him.
All right, I'll wrap up with a quick bit of post-production unless you have anything else to say.
No, all good. Happy with that.
All right. So yeah, it came out 2005. There were premiere screenings at the Edinburgh International Film Festival. They sold out pretty damn quickly. So they added some more screenings, which also sold out incredibly quickly. This did not translate to wider box office success. It debuted at number 2 on the on its opening weekend, so it didn't even open at number 1 on the box office, and it performed kind of so poorly that its release got pulled in a few countries, and it pretty much just made its production budget back. So it will have ended up losing money on any advertising, stuff like that happened. Critical reception was much better than that, and it got generally very good reviews. A few great ones. I know Roger Ebert, who's one of the biggest film critics out there, was a big fan. It won a bunch of Sci-Fi awards. It didn't trouble Oscars or anything like that, but it won Hugo Awards and Nebula Awards. It was awarded Best Sci-Fi Film and Best Story at the IGN Film Awards. So, in genre circles, it was very well regarded.
Yeah.
On Empire's 500 Greatest Films of All Time in 2008, it ranked at 383rd. I looked at the other films around in the 380s. There's a couple of 80s and 90s Oscar Best Picture winners, and just ahead of it is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So it's in some esteemed company there.
Yeah, absolutely.
The DVDs of Firefly and Serenity were both sent out into space by in a little capsule. There was also a 2009 NASA poll to name a node on the International Space Station, and it was 4 options, and Serenity ran away with the poll. It got 70% of the vote, and then for some reason, I don't know what, they decided to just name it something completely different. Yeah, as I said, the kind of story has been continued, and the story between the film and the series has been covered, and a lot of other kind of extraneous stories as well have all been tackled in comic book form.
Right.
So there is more out there in kind of written graphic novel form. Yeah, that's kind of all I've got. I'll give my quite quick final thoughts on this. Obviously, as I say, this film is a big hit of nostalgia for me. As you say, the definition of nostalgia. When I see that moment, when I'm rewatching Firefly and then Serenity, and I go, "Oh my god, that's that!"
Yeah.
The fact that it evoked that reaction in me at that point, that's why it will always be one of my favourite films. I think the show is so great, and I think the film did it justice as a closing, kind of to the show.
Yeah.
I adore it. Mal Reynolds, one of my all-time favourite characters, and I think he deserves to be put up there with the likes of Han Solo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I genuinely, I think he's just as good.
Yeah. Yeah. As you said, there was a lot more exploration into his character because he had the foundations of the series. So
yeah.
I really liked it. I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't sure it was going to be my cup of tea, but I actually really enjoyed it. And, although I mentioned there are a couple of things that I either found a little bit predictable or felt that they weren't substantiated enough, possibly because I hadn't seen the series. So that's not necessarily to do with the writing or anything. I actually really, I liked it for what it was, and it was a fun watch.
I think we're going to have to do a closer at some point where you watch Firefly and then you come back and tell me how you feel about that.
Okay, all right. I will watch it,
Great.
I promise.
I believe you. So there you go. That's our thoughts on Serenity. One of my childhood favourites. And Nye, what's your pick going to be for next week?
So my pick is... So this is a film that I haven't seen for ages. And it was a film that I remembered but couldn't remember the name of. And I got reminded of it last week. And it's aptly enough for this podcast. It's the 1999 film Blast from the Past.
I can't say I've heard of this.
So this is 1999. It's Brendan Fraser.
Okay.
And it's I really enjoyed it as a kid. I'm not sure how I'll rate it this time. Just looking at it on IMDb, 6.6 out of 10. So fairly average. It's a comedy, drama, romance film. I mean, I don't want to give too much away.
The cast looks stacked.
Yeah. It's. I mean,
Brendan Fraser, Alicia Silverstone, Christopher Walken, Sissy Spacek.
Yeah, I mean, it is a pretty banging cast, and I don't want to give too much away, but
I'm intrigued.
It's kind of like a coming of age film, but for an adult who has been absent from society for a long period of time.
Fascinating. I can't say I've ever heard of it before, so I look forward to that.
Yeah, it's one that I just remembered the other week. I was reminded of the film and thought that's the film that I want to watch.
Awesome.
So, yeah, hope you enjoy.
So closer this week, obviously Firefly, Serenity based on Firefly, one of my all-time favourite TV shows. I just want to know, what are your all-time favourite TV shows?
Oh, that is a tough... Actually, I say it's a tough one. I don't think it is.
Okay.
So, one that I absolutely love, because the writing's amazing, the acting is unbelievable, is Breaking Bad. I'm not sure that comes as a surprise. I think the best TV show I have ever seen, though, has got to be The Wire.
I thought you'd also say that.
Yeah, and I think... I'm not sure if you've seen it. I think we've had a discussion about it. I know that your dad's seen it. And
I've seen it.
Yeah.
Not for years. It's one I intend to rewatch.
Me too. But, yeah, I mean, it's filled with some iconic characters and performances, and I love the movement through from one series to the next, and it is just absolutely brilliant. It's definitely up there with one of the best series as far as I'm concerned ever. I think it's actually kind of quite widely regarded as one of the best TV series ever.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm also just having a look at my collection on my shelf, just because Breaking Bad is on there. Game of Thrones it's an interesting one. I think it's quite a contentious one, just because
people don't like the ending.
Yeah, it didn't have the ending that a lot of people were hoping for. That's something that I could probably talk about for quite a while.
Let's leave that.
Yeah, but the first few seasons, absolutely incredible. Up there with some of the best TV I've ever seen, for me personally. Cool. So I'd put those three up there, but The Wire for me, I think, tops it, possibly Breaking Bad as well, but The Wire is just unbelievable to me.
Nice. I see you're going for pure quality, whereas I'm going to go with this is what my heart says. I'm not going to say, because I agree, I think The Wire probably is maybe the best show ever made. But it's not in my favourite shows. My favourite shows, Buffy, again, obviously horrible things happen on that set, but I love the show. Mm-hmm. It's hard to rewatch now, but I do adore it. Smallville, that's like nostalgia 101 for me. I spent a lot of time watching that when I was sort of in secondary school. A more recent one, BoJack Horseman, I think is up there with one of the best shows ever made, and I don't think it will kind of get the credit of something like The Wire or Breaking Bad, because it's not seen as prestige because it's animated. Yeah. But oh man, that show broke me more than anything I've ever seen before.
There is no doubt that regardless of animation or not, quality is just, it's undeniable.
So I think it should be considered along with the likes of The Wire, Breaking Bad, Sopranos, all of these. Yeah. And I think it's seen as a great animated show without being seen necessarily as like one of the greatest TV shows ever made, which I think it deserves to be. Yeah. That's just an incredible exploration into sort of mental health and depression and fame and a whole bag of human
emotions
issues.
And
and then the one that that will always be my favourite show. It's going to be impossible to budge. It's Doctor Who.
Oh yes,
I am
how
a
could I
Doctor
forget?
Who nerd through and through.
Yeah.
I think the greatest episode of TV ever made is the first David Tennant season, and it's episode 4. It's The Girl in the Fireplace, which is the one with Madame de Pompadour in France. I love Doctor Who. I still love Doctor Who. I think obviously the quality is variable depending on even just like episode to episode in a season.
Yeah, well, they have different writers, don't they? So it's bound to have varying quality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bunch of the older ones, I kind of, when you get into like Peter Davidson is okay, and then you get into like 6 and 7, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy, it's not great. Like that stuff isn't great. But I started watching from The Return with Christopher Eccleston, and it's been like my first love in terms of TV ever since.
Yeah, great. I think also, just before I forget, I do also love, and you're going to turn your nose up at this, The Office US.
I'm not a fan.
Yeah, it's one of those series that for me, like, it's so easy to watch, and if it is your type of humor, then you will love it, and I could just watch it again and again.
I know I'm in the minority on this.
Yeah, but also, like, and there is a very much kind of, I think there is quite a definite split between those people who prefer the US and the UK.
I prefer the US Office. I think the UK Office is unbearable. I think the US Office is a perfectly okay comedy.
Yeah. For me, the main thing is obviously the characters. You get so kind of.
I hate half the characters.
Yeah, well, that'll be why. Then.
Can't stand Steve Carell's guy. I can't stand him.
Michael Scott. Well, see,
unbearable.
For me, I think
just one of the worst humans to have ever lived. And he's
it depends how you look at it, because he is maybe just somebody who is looking for a friend, somebody to actually love him a little bit, and he doesn't have the social means to do it, and he doesn't have the capacity to be able to reach out to people and connect with them in the same way that others might, and he's just lonely. That's kind of what I got from it. And yes, okay, he needs to learn some lessons, and he is a bit of a douche, and he makes
I think what you mean is he needs to not be so racist and sexist and homophobic all the time.
Yeah. But what I would say is that this is comedy. Like, he's a comedy genius. His acting in this is incredible, and especially when you put Michael Scott next to Steve Carell, the way that he manipulates, not only the way he creates the character, but the way he manipulates the camera and the audience, and the way he interacts with the camera is just absolutely spot on, perfect. Like, it's comedy. Like, it's those particular comedy techniques to a T. And so that, for me, is why I could watch it again and again. Yes, there are moments where I'm like, oh my God, Michael, stop talking. This is awful. Somebody needs to fire this guy. But it's the fact that Steve Carell can create that and so accurately and so brilliantly, that for me is one of the reasons why I love The Office so much.
I will say I do enjoy Jim and Pam's relationship. That's the thing in the show that's good for me.
You are rooting for them from day one, and
yeah, for me that's the one thing in the show that's good.
If I could be half the boyfriend that Jim Halpert is, then I will be happy.
Great. So those are some of our all-time favourite TV shows there. Yeah. And you can find us on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, a few other places as well. You can follow us at Nostalgia Bubble on Twitter and at Nostalgia Bubble Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. You can follow me everywhere at Shuggie Says.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Nyrees, Nyerrees, and on Instagram at ReeseNye.
And we'll see you next week to fawn over Brendan Fraser. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.